The transport ship broke through the cloud layer at dawn, and the planet below looked like a wound. That was the only word for it. The surface of Karath-Roman 4 was a bruised purple-gray, split open in every direction by canyons of razor stone and rivers of chemical runoff that glowed a toxic amber in the low light. The atmosphere was breathable, technically, the way a hospital room is breathable technically, laced with trace compounds that made your eyes sting and your lungs feel like they were learning a new language every time you inhaled. I pressed my face to the viewport and stared down at it. "First time seeing Karath," said the man beside me. He was Vethian, blue-skinned, four-armed, a veteran's worth of scars mapped across the side of his neck. He was watching me watch the planet with the kind of expression you give a child who has just announced they plan to swim across an ocean. "First time," I said. "You're the human." It wasn't a question. I was the only human on the transport. I had been the only human in the selection pool, the only human in the administrative office when I filed my candidacy, and the only human in every room I'd entered for the past 11 days since the Galactic Defense Corps had accepted my application to the Deathworld Specialist track. "Mara Vasquez," I said, and offered my hand. He looked at it. He'd been briefed enough on human customs to know what the gesture meant, but he made no move to take it. "You won't last the first rotation," he said. Not cruelly, flatly, the way you state a fact about weather. No human ever has. He turned back to his own viewport. I turned back to mine. Below us, Karath-Roman 4 continued to look like a wound. The processing center was a flat-roofed complex half buried in the canyon wall, built from the same gray stone as the world around it, as if the planet had grown it on purpose as a trap. We filed off the transport in 2 lines, 16 candidates in total, representing 8 species, and stood on the landing platform while the wind tried to push us sideways, and the amber rivers 30 meters below us caught the light and turned it mean. The air tasted like copper and wet stone. My lungs registered the trace compounds immediately, not painfully, just as information, a new variable to account for. I had spent 6 weeks before leaving Earth reading everything the GDC database had on Karath-Roman 4 atmospheric chemistry. I knew the compound names, the absorption rates at rest and under exertion, the expected physiological responses at various exposure durations. I had brought supplementary anti-compound tablets and had already begun the loading protocol. The other candidates watched me take a tablet from my kit as we assembled on the platform, and a few of them looked at each other. I was obviously doing something they hadn't thought of, and they couldn't decide whether that was impressive or a bad sign about what was coming. The intake officer ran through orientation in the clipped, efficient shorthand of someone who had done this several thousand times and was unmoved by every iteration of it. Rules, rotations, points, failure conditions. The track ran for 30 standard days. Candidates who survived all 30 rotations, or who completed at least 25 without requiring emergency extraction, received Deathworld certification. Candidates who required emergency extraction were disqualified and discharged. There were 38 scored rotation exercises, and a continuous passive assessment score running alongside them at all times, assessed by the instructors from surveillance data. "And the mortality rate?" I asked because nobody else had. The intake officer, a Vethian like my transport companion but older, blinked his inner eyelids once. "Non-zero," he said, "but we have not lost a candidate in 6 years." He paused. "The last candidate to die on Karath was a Sorathi warbeast. They are the most physically resilient species currently registered with the GDC." He looked at me when he said it. Everyone looked at me. I smiled. "Good safety record," I said. "I appreciate that." Nobody laughed. The wind pushed. The amber rivers glittered. I stood exactly as steady as anyone else on the platform, which I could tell from the way the intake officer's eyes moved back to me twice during the rest of the briefing, was not what he'd expected. But across the processing courtyard, someone was watching me, and I felt it before I found the source, the way you feel a fire in a cold room before you see it. I turned and I found her. She was standing on the elevated walkway above the courtyard, arms folded, looking down at the group of us with the particular stillness of someone who has already made a set of decisions and is simply waiting for the world to confirm them. She was Kalhari. I recognized the species from the briefings. Tall, slender, with gray lavender skin that shifted subtly in tone with mood and temperature, high sharp cheekbones, ears that came to a point, and eyes the deep amber gold of the rivers below us. Her hair was white, pulled back in a severe braid. She wore the black and silver uniform of a senior track instructor, and the 4 bars on her collar put her at master grade. She was looking at me. Not the way everyone else was looking at me, with curiosity or condescension or the morbid interest of someone watching a small animal approach a trap. She was looking at me the way a scientist looks at a data point that doesn't fit the model, with something between irritation and focus. Our eyes met for a moment. Then she turned and walked away without a word. Her name was Instructor Vareth. I learned that from the placement board that evening, when the rotation assignments went up and her name appeared beside mine. She was the lead instructor for the Rift Group, which was the designation for the 6 candidates sorted into the lowest predicted survival tier. I was in the Rift Group. I found this out at the same moment the Vethian from the transport, whose name turned out to be Darrow, found out he was in the Apex Group, the highest tier. He looked at my assignment, then at me, with a kind of weary resignation. "The Rift Group has the highest extraction rate," he said. "It's not that they put the weakest candidates there. It's that they put the candidates the instructors can afford to lose." "That's a cheerful way to put it," I said. "I'm Vethian," he said. "We don't do cheerful." He paused. "Vareth is the best instructor on this facility. She's also the harshest. 3 of her Rift candidates in the last cycle asked for extraction voluntarily in the first week." Voluntarily. She didn't break any rules. She just, he searched for the right word. She makes the environment legible. She shows you exactly what's going to kill you and then steps back and lets you decide whether to proceed. Most people, when they understand the full picture, make rational decisions. And the ones who don't make rational decisions, they either get certified, he said, or they get carried out. He walked away. I stood in front of the placement board for a moment longer, reading the name again. Vareth, Master Grade. Rift Group. Then I went to find my bunk. The first morning, Instructor Vareth arrived at the Rift Group barracks at what I can only describe as an unreasonable hour, and she arrived the way weather arrives, all at once, everywhere. She did not knock. She did not announce herself. She was simply there, standing in the center of the room, and the 4 other candidates in our group, a Sorathi, a Yulani, a Grevet, and a Talon, came off their bunks in varying states of alarm and dressed themselves faster than I had believed possible. I was already dressed. I had been awake for 2 hours. I couldn't sleep on unfamiliar worlds, and Kareth Roman 4 had a magnetic resonance that hummed just below the threshold of audibility. I could feel it in my back teeth. I'd spent the pre-dawn doing stretches in the small space beside my bunk, reviewing the topographic maps I'd downloaded, and eating one of my own protein bars because the GDC rations didn't account for human nutritional requirements, and I'd packed accordingly. Instructor Vareth looked at me standing there, already dressed, already fed, already oriented. She said nothing. Then she looked at the rest of the group, who were still fumbling with boots and equipment seals, and she said, "You have 40 seconds before I mark you unprepared. Unprepared costs you 2 points. You begin the day at -2, which means the environment must kill you twice before you break even." It was not a joke. The scoring system worked exactly that way. Everyone finished dressing in 31 seconds. The first rotation was a 10-kilometer traverse across the rift floor, the network of canyons that gave our group its name. The floor was loose shale over pressurized gas pockets, which meant every third step might be solid ground or might crack through into a void that dropped you 3 meters into a sulfur pocket. The trick, we were told in the briefing, was weight distribution. Keep your steps short and even. Never commit your full mass to a step until you've tested it. The Sorathi candidate, whose name was Braca, was the largest member of our group by a significant margin, roughly twice my mass, and built like a fortification. He broke through the shale twice in the first kilometer. Each time, the emergency anchor cable on his harness caught him. Each time, he hauled himself back up with cheerful efficiency and kept moving. The fourth time he broke through, the shale around the hole cascaded, widening the gap, and the rim of it caught the ankle of the Yulani candidate, Sessa, and she went down sideways, rolling toward the edge. I was the closest. I moved before I'd made a decision about it, dropping to my knees on solid rock and getting my arm around hers as she came past me. The momentum dragged me a meter toward the hole before my boots caught a ridge and held. Sessa's weight stabilized. We lay there on the shale for a moment, both of us breathing hard, the amber light from the canyon walls turning everything the color of a bad dream. "You can let go," she said. "In a second," I said. I waited until my legs had confirmed they were on solid rock. Then I helped her up, and we continued. I didn't look at Instructor Varath, who was watching from the canyon rim above us through a surveillance scope. But I heard later that she had noted something in her log. The days on Karathroman 4 had a rhythm, and the rhythm was this: wake early, be tested, fail or survive, sleep briefly, repeat. Rotation 2 was a 3-hour endurance swim through the chemical tributaries in full hazard gear. The gear handled the toxins but not the cold, and the cold on Karathroman 4 was not the honest cold of ice or snow, but the insidious cold of fluid that pulled heat out of you in layers. So gradually, you didn't notice until you were shivering past the point of efficiency. I have a high cold tolerance. I grew up in a mountain region of Earth where the winters were the kind that got named after people who died in them. I don't know if that's genetics or conditioning, but I outlasted every other candidate in the chemical swim by 32 minutes, and I came out of the tributary on my own 2 feet, while the Grevet candidate was being extracted by harness, and the Talon was sitting on the bank making small, involuntary sounds. Instructor Varath was there when I climbed out. She didn't help me. She didn't step back either. She stood exactly where she was and let me choose my own footing. I stood in front of her, dripping chemical water, and she looked at me for a long moment. Her amber gold eyes moved across me with that same measuring quality I'd noticed in the courtyard, not hostile but not warm. Precise, the way instruments are precise. "Your suit seal is degraded at the left shoulder joint," she said. "You've been absorbing trace compounds for the last 40 minutes. I looked at my shoulder. There was a faint discoloration on the suit material. "I noticed at the 2-hour mark," I said. "I calculated the absorption rate against my body mass. I had a safe margin." Something shifted in her face, a small thing barely there. "You calculated it?" "Yes." "How long was your margin?" "About 90 minutes at the maximum absorption rate," I said. "I finished with 50 minutes to spare." She was quiet for a moment. The amber light from the canyon walls was behind her, and it put her in silhouette for a moment. The sharp cheekbones, the pointed ears, the severe braid, like something carved out of the world. "Most candidates," she said, "when they identify a suit degradation, request extraction." "I know," I said. "I read the incident reports before I came." "Why didn't you?" I thought about how to answer that. "Because I came here to be certified," I said, "not to practice requesting extraction." She said nothing else. She walked away and I watched her go, and I could not read her at all. On day 6, Instructor Sale Varath did something none of the other candidates had seen her do. She told us why. We were gathered in the planning room after Rotation 8, a navigation exercise through the Kareth Ridge system in zero visibility conditions, which had taken us 11 hours and cost Braca 2 points for an anchor misfire, and the Yulani candidate a mild concussion from a rock fall. We were all exhausted. We were also all still present. Nobody from the Rift group had requested extraction, which I gathered from the looks on the facility staff's faces was unusual. The facility staff, I had noticed, had been doing a lot of that, exchanging looks when they thought the candidates weren't watching. The Rift group was supposed to shed members. That was, apparently, not a design flaw but a feature. The group existed as a calibration, a place to put candidates whose likelihood of success was low enough that their rotations provided useful data about the lower limit of the track's demands. Having a full Rift group still intact on day 6 was, by the standards of the facility, strange. Instructor Varath did not seem to find it strange. She seemed, if anything, to find it an interesting variable, the way she found everything an interesting variable. She watched us file into the planning room with the same precise attention she gave the canyon winds. She stood at the head of the room and looked at us for a moment in the way she had, that flat, measuring look, and then she said, "The Deathworld specialist track exists because the GDC discovered something uncomfortable 40 years ago. The most dangerous environments in the galaxy are not the ones that kill you quickly. They are the ones that kill you slowly, through attrition, through the accumulation of small decisions made under sustained stress. The soldiers who failed in those environments weren't weak. They were undertrained. They had never been forced to make decisions when exhausted, cold, poisoned, afraid, and uncertain all at the same time." She paused. "That is what this track is for, not to find the strongest bodies. To find the strongest decision-making processes." Braca to my left made a sound of understanding. Sessa nodded. Even the Grevitt candidate, who was typically so still during briefings that I occasionally checked to make sure he was still breathing, shifted in his seat in a way that communicated something like, "Yes, this is the thing I have been trying to articulate." I said, "Is that why you show us what's going to kill us, and then let us decide?" Instructor Varath's eyes went to me. "Yes," she said. "Because a soldier who understands the risk and chooses to continue anyway is more reliable than one who continues because they haven't been shown what they're walking into." "Correct. That's a good philosophy," I said. "It is not a philosophy," she said. "It is a tested method. It has a 94% certification rate for candidates who complete the first 10 rotations. A beat. The candidates who don't complete the first 10 rotations are typically removed by the environment in the first 3 days, or they remove themselves by voluntary extraction when the full picture becomes clear. The removal rate falls steeply after rotation 6. She paused. "You are on rotation 8. All of you." She said it levelly to all of us, but her eyes came back to me when she said, "No human candidate has ever reached rotation 10. She said it without cruelty. She said it the way she said everything, as a fact, as a data point that she was laying on the table and waiting for us to do something with. "Well," I said, "I'm on rotation 8. She looked at me for one moment more. In the amber light of the planning room, her amber gold eyes had a quality to them that I couldn't fully name, something that was not quite interest and not quite challenge, but occupied the space between them. Then she said, "Dismissed," and turned to her notes. And I sat for a moment longer than everyone else, and I thought about rotation 10, and I thought about my grandmother, and I got up and went to prepare for it. On day 3, I had my first real conversation with Instructor Varath. Not by design, hers or mine. It happened because rotation 4 was a heat source traverse, a navigation exercise that required candidates to locate and reach a specific destination using only the thermal signatures of the planet's gas vents as landmarks. And I had gotten ahead of the rest of the group by 40 minutes because I had mapped the vent distribution pattern the night before, and my chosen route cut 3 kilometers off the standard path. I reached the destination point, logged my arrival, and sat down to wait. And Instructor Vareth arrived from the opposite direction 2 minutes later, having come directly from a separate observation post rather than following the candidates through the traverse, and found me there alone. She stopped. I looked up at her. She looked at me. "You took the secondary vent corridor," she said. "It was shorter. It is also higher risk. The venting schedule in that corridor is irregular. If a vent had fired while you were crossing the mouth, you'd have been in a direct thermal blast." "I checked the vent log from the past 4 days," I said. "The corridor pattern is irregular but not random. There's an underlying pressure cycle of about 4 hours. I crossed it at hour 3 of the cycle. The blast window opens at hour 4. I paused. I had a 60-minute margin. Instructor Vareth was very still for a moment. She had a quality in those moments of stillness, not absence, but compression, like she was processing several things at once and hadn't yet determined the sequence in which to address them. "You read the vent logs," she said. "I read everything available in the facility database that relates to the next day's exercise zone," I said. "Every night before I sleep. It takes about an hour." "You sleep 4 hours," she said. "So I have an hour before those 4 hours," I said. She looked at me for a moment with that precise, measuring quality. "What did you do before applying to the GDC track?" "I was a geological survey specialist," I said, "for a private mining consortium. Hazardous environment surveys, places they wanted to mine that they needed someone to go in first and determine whether they could do it without killing everyone." I paused. "I spent 7 years going into places that were likely to kill me and doing math about whether they would." "Why did you leave?" "The consortium got bought by a larger one that decided to automate the surveys," I said. "Drones and sensor arrays. More efficient, lower cost, zero mortality liability." "So you came here." "So I came here," I said. She sat down, not close, a reasonable distance the way professionals sit in professional spaces, but she sat. "The vent corridor route," she said. "No other candidate identified it." "It's subtle," I said. "If you're not specifically looking for secondary path optimization, you wouldn't notice it. The briefing materials present the standard route as the route." "But you looked for optimization." "I always look for optimization," I said. 7 years in hazardous geological environments teaches you that the standard route is the route someone planned when they had time to plan. In the field, it's the route someone planned for average conditions. Average conditions are an abstraction. I looked out at the vent field around us, the pale columns of rising heat, the scorched rock, the particular quality of silence that very hot places have, like the world is holding its breath. I planned for the specific conditions of the specific day. Instructor Vareth was looking at me with an expression I was not yet good enough at Kalahari faces to read correctly. Something between the measuring quality I'd come to associate with her thinking mode and something else, something I hadn't seen in her yet. "When the other candidates arrive," she said, "say nothing about the corridor route." I looked at her. "Not because I am hiding information from them," she said. "Because the discovery of non-standard paths is itself an assessment criterion. If you tell them, I cannot assess whether they would have found it." "Understood," I said. She nodded once. Then she pulled out her data slate and began logging the rotation notes, and I sat across from her in the heat shimmer of the vent field, and we did not speak again. But there was a quality to the silence that had not been in the earlier silences, something that was, if not comfortable, at least not its opposite. When Braca arrived 38 minutes later, he looked at the two of us sitting across from each other in companionable silence, and made an expression that, on a Sorathi face, meant profound confusion. I didn't explain. Rotation 9 was the one that nearly ended it. The exercise was a solo traverse of the Eastern Rift, a section of canyon system that the topographic maps showed as navigable, but that the maps had, it turned out, not been updated to account for a seismic event 8 months prior. The canyon floor in the eastern section had dropped 3 meters and half a kilometer of it was now submerged under chemical runoff. I discovered this approximately 40 minutes into the solo traverse, when the path I'd mapped from the briefing materials ended at a wall of amber chemical fluid that stretched from cliff face to cliff face and gave no indication of how deep it was. I had a hazard suit, but the shoulder seal from Rotation 2 had been replaced with a patch rather than a proper replacement. Supply lag, the equipment officer had explained apologetically, and I wasn't confident the patch would hold for a full immersion crossing. I had the emergency beacon. I stood at the edge of the chemical flood for a while, doing math. The map showed the canyon narrowing another 200 meters ahead, which meant, potentially, a crossing point. If I could get above the flood line, I could cross at the narrow point and continue. If I went back, I failed the rotation, 2 points lost, and more importantly, a mark on my record. I looked at the cliff wall beside me. It was jagged stone, fractured by the seismic event, which meant it was probably unstable, but it also had handholds, natural ones, not safe handholds, but they existed. I thought about what Instructor Varath had said. The soldiers who failed in those environments weren't weak. They were undertrained. They had never been forced to make decisions when exhausted, cold, poisoned, afraid, and uncertain, all at the same time. I was exhausted, I was cold, I was afraid, I was uncertain. I started climbing. The cliff face was about 40 meters at its highest point before it tapered back down to ground level past the flood zone. The rock was cold and slightly slick from condensation, and it broke under my hands twice in the first 10 meters, not enough to drop me, but enough to update my working model of the surface's reliability. I adjusted my technique, smaller holds, more redundancy, never committing my weight to a single point. The chemical flood below me smelled metallic and wrong. At 20 meters, a section of the cliff face the size of a door detached. It went slowly, which was the only thing that saved me. I had time to see it happening, the hairline fracture propagating, the stone tilting, and I moved left along the face fast enough that when it went in the space where I'd been and not the space where I was. The concussion of it hitting the flood below sent a wave of chemical water up the cliff face and across my gloves. I stopped, checked the gloves, intact. Kept climbing. At the top, I lay on my back on the cliff edge for approximately 2 minutes, staring at the purple-gray sky, letting my heart rate talk itself down from wherever it had gone. Then I got up, found the narrow crossing point 200 meters along the ridge, crossed it, descended the far side, and completed the rotation. The timer showed I'd finished 47 minutes late. Late cost 1 point. I had still not used the emergency beacon. Instructor Varath was waiting at the finish point when I arrived, which was not usual. Instructors monitored via surveillance, not in person, for solo traverses. She was standing exactly as I'd first seen her, arms folded, still watching. She looked at my gloves first, then at my face, then at my overall condition, muddy, exhausted, the left knee of my suit scraped raw from the cliff face. "The path was flooded," she said. "Yes. You were monitored. I watched you climb the cliff face. I figured. You could have used the beacon." "I know." She was quiet for a moment. Behind her, the canyon system ran amber and gray in the late light, and the whole world had that peculiar bruised beauty that I had come to find almost comfortable over the past 9 days. "The cliff detachment," she said. "You moved correctly." I read the seismic reports for this canyon system before the rotation. The post-event geology is prone to fracture propagation rather than sudden collapse. I knew I'd have a window if something let go. She was very still. You read the seismic reports, she said. Before every rotation, I read every available document about the zone we're operating in, I said. I know it doesn't fully substitute for the experience your other candidates have. My body doesn't have the same baseline adaptations. So I compensate with information. When do you sleep? She asked. It was not rhetorical, she genuinely wanted to know. 4 hours, I said. I function well on 4 hours. It's a human thing. I searched for the right word. Inefficient sleepers but robust ones. We can run on less for longer than most. Instructor Sale Vareth looked at me for a long time. Not with the flat measuring quality of before. With something else. Something that I didn't know how to read in a Kalahari face but that I thought, in a human face, I would have called unsettled. Rotation 10 begins at 4th hour tomorrow, she said. I'll be ready, I said. She turned to go. Then she stopped, and without turning back around, she said something I did not expect. Your climbing technique on the cliff face was correct, not textbook correct. Correct for the specific surface conditions you were dealing with. She walked away. I stood in the amber light and tried to decide what to do with that. On day 12, Instructor Vareth came to the Rift Group barracks alone in the hour before the morning rotation and sat on the bench across from my bunk. This had never happened before. The other candidates were still asleep or pretending to be. I was awake, reading my zone briefings on a handheld screen, and I lowered it when she came in and watched her choose her spot and sit down with the deliberate care of someone who has thought about this and decided to do it anyway. I want to show you something, she said. She pulled up a records display on her own screen and turned it to face me. It was a log of Deathworld specialist track completions over the past 40 years, a long list, searchable by species. She had it filtered to show only the non-completion entries, candidates who had been extracted, voluntary and involuntary, and candidates who had not survived. I want you to understand what you're doing, she said. I understand what I'm doing. I don't think you do, she said it without sharpness, almost carefully. This is not stubbornness on your part. You are not operating on stubbornness. You are operating on incomplete information. You don't know what the environment does to human physiology over sustained exposure, because no human has been on Karathroman 4 for more than 9 days. Until me. Until you, she held my gaze. On day 14, the track enters the high rift section. The gas concentrations there are 3 times what you've been exposed to. Even with a functioning hazard suit, you will absorb trace compounds at a rate your body has never experienced. I do not know what that does to human physiology. There is no data. Then we'll find out, I said. That is not a sufficient answer, she said, and for the first time there was an edge in her voice. Not anger, but something close to it, something controlled and bright. If the data we collect is that you die in the high rift, that is not a useful contribution to the core. And if the data is that I don't, I said. If I make it through the high rift and through day 14 and through the rest of the rotations and I get certified, what's that data worth? She was very still. Worth, she repeated. If I make it through, I said, then the GDC has a template for human candidates. They know the timeline, the compound exposure levels, the physiological responses. Every human who wants Deathworld certification after me has a map. I paused. Right now, there's no map. There's just the assumption that we can't do it. Instructor Vareth set the records display down on her knee and looked at me. Her eyes in the dim barracks light were the deepest amber gold I'd ever seen up close. Not flat, not cold, but complex. Layered. I had been watching Kalahari faces for 12 days and I was getting better at reading them, and what I read in her face now was something I hadn't expected to find there. Conflict. Why, she said. Why what? Why does it matter to you? The map for future candidates. You don't know them, you will never know them. Her voice was precise but not unkind. Humans are not a collectivist species. Your recorded cultural tendencies favor individual achievement and personal legacy. So what is this? I thought about it. It was a real question, and it deserved a real answer. Grandmother came to Earth's orbital station at 19, I said, from a mountain town where nobody had ever left the atmosphere. She was the first person in her family to leave Earth. She didn't know how to do it. There was no guide, no translator, no mapped path. She figured it out by making mistakes and surviving them, and she kept notes, and she sent those notes back. Because of her notes, the next person from her town who wanted to leave had a starting point. I paused. I'm her granddaughter. This is what we do. Instructor Vareth was very quiet. The barracks were very quiet. Your grandmother's notes, she said at last, are they archived? It was such an unexpected question that I almost laughed. At the Vasquez Family Historical Archive in Mendoza, I said. Yes. I would read them, she said, if they were available to access. I did laugh then, a small one startled out of me. I'll get you the access codes, I said, after I finish the track. She looked at me for a moment longer. Then she picked up her records display, stood, and walked to the barracks door. She paused there with her back to me, and she said, Your suit shoulder has a new seal installed. Full replacement. I submitted the requisition myself this morning. She left. I sat with that for a long time. Day 14. The High Rift. It was everything she had said it would be, and then some. The gas concentrations in the High Rift were not just elevated. They were visible asterisk, a faint amber haze that hung in the canyon air and made the light refract strangely, so that the walls seemed to breathe and shift. The suit sensors logged compound absorption every 15 minutes, and the numbers climbed in a steady curve that I watched the way you watch water rising. Not panicked, informed. Braca developed gill interference at hour 3. His Sorathi respiratory system, designed for thinner atmospheres, was struggling with the compound density. He was extracted at hour 4. Sessa's Ulani biochemistry reacted to a specific compound in the high rift gas that she hadn't registered sensitivity to at lower concentrations. She used her beacon voluntarily at hour 3.5, which was the right call and a brave one. The Grevet and the Talon made it to hour 6, then hour 8. Then the Grevet was extracted for equipment failure, and the Talon reached the high rift's far boundary at hour 9 and cleared the zone. I reached the far boundary at hour 9:40. I sat down on the safe side of the boundary marker and put my head between my knees and breathed in the marginally cleaner air and let my body do what bodies do when they've been running at maximum output for 9 hours and have finally been told they can slow down. I was nauseous. My vision had a persistent faint shimmer at the edges, compound exposure, the suit log confirmed, within survivable parameters but at the upper edge. My hands were shaking. I was alive. I was certified for high rift exposure, which meant the GDC now had data. Human physiology, survivable at high rift compound levels for up to 9 hours and 40 minutes. New data point, first of its kind. My grandmother would have appreciated that. Instructor Vareth found me still sitting at the boundary marker when she arrived for the post-rotation debrief. She stopped a few meters away and looked at the suit logs I'd transmitted. She read them without expression, or with the expression I was now beginning to understand was hers when she was processing something that had revised her model. The slight tension at the corner of her mouth. The stillness that was actually a very controlled form of attention. Compound absorption at the upper survivable limit, she said. Yes. Physiological response. Nausea, visual shimmer, fine motor tremor, all presenting now within the ranges my pre-exposure research suggested. You researched what the expected physiological response would be. I couldn't find human-specific data, I said, because there isn't any. so I modeled it from Vethian response data, adjusted for the physiological differences I could quantify. I was about 11% off on the tremor onset timeline. She sat down. Not beside me, a few meters away, on a flat section of rock at the boundary. But she sat down, which Instructor Vareth had, in 14 days, never once done in the presence of candidates. I was wrong, she said. I looked at her. When you arrived, she said, I assessed your candidacy and I concluded that you would not complete the track. My conclusion was based on documented species data for Roman 4 and the physiological profiles of human biology as registered with the GDC medical database. The conclusion was, she paused, technically correct based on available data. But incomplete, I said. But incomplete, she agreed. The available data did not account for the fact that you had read the seismic reports or that your grandmother kept notes. We sat in the amber light at the boundary of the high rift, and the canyon walls around us breathed their chemical breath, and neither of us said anything for a while. 11 days left, I said eventually. 11 days, she confirmed. I'm going to finish. She was quiet for a moment. I know, she said. It was the simplest thing she had ever said to me. It was also, I realized, the first time she had said it. The last 11 days were the hardest. Not because the rotations were more severe. They were, but I had calibrated myself to Roman 4 by now, had absorbed its logic and its rhythms into my decision-making the way you absorb any environment you stay in long enough. The hard part was cumulative depletion. 30 days is a long time to run at maximum output, and by day 20, my body was doing the math in a way it hadn't in the first 2 weeks. Tighter margins, slower recovery, a persistent awareness of what I was drawing from reserves that were not unlimited. Instructor Vareth knew it too. She didn't ease the rotations, which I hadn't expected her to. That would have been counterproductive, and she was not a counterproductive person. But she began something she had not done before, which was to appear at the end of rotations with specific information I hadn't asked for. The topographic update for the next day's zone. A note about a new gas pocket mapped by the surveillance drones. A data sheet on compound interaction, effects at prolonged exposure levels. Information. She was giving me the thing she'd diagnosed as my compensatory tool. I started to understand her then, the way I hadn't fully understood her in the first 2 weeks. Instructor Sale Vareth was not a cold person. She was a person who had built a very careful system for not making errors of sentiment, because in environments that killed you, errors of sentiment got people carried out in bags. She had calibrated herself exactly as I calibrated myself to Roman 4, to the conditions of her world. And her world was a place where candidates died if you liked them too much to show them the full truth. She had shown me the full truth on day 12 in the barracks, and I had said, then we'll find out. And she had ordered me a new suit seal and filed it herself. On day 22, something happened that the track had not accounted for. The exercise was a 2-person coordination traverse, a rare departure from the solo format, designed to test command and communication under stress. Candidates were paired across groups, rift with Apex, and my partner turned out to be Darrow. He did not seem pleased about this. Not, I thought, because it was me specifically, but because the Vethian approach to problem-solving under stress was highly individual, and working in tandem with someone whose decision cycles he didn't know was a source of friction for him. We stood at the traverse entry point while he reviewed the zone map with the focused intensity of someone who has already planned 3 routes and is now stress-testing all 3 simultaneously, and I reviewed it alongside him, and then I said, South Corridor. The rock formation at the 2-kilometer mark gives us high ground and a full sight line on both the gas pocket array and the crossing point. He looked at the map. He looked at me, he said, that's correct. I read the drone survey from yesterday, I said. A pause. So did I, he said. We looked at each other. South Corridor, we said at the same moment. It was not in the end a difficult traverse. What it was a revelation, because Darrow and I, it turned out, thought in the same structural register about hostile environments. Information first, hypothesis second, action third, contingency always held in reserve. The difference was that he reached his conclusions through species-specific instinct, shaped by 3 generations of Vethian military culture. And I reached mine through research and my grandmother's voice in the back of my head saying, make notes, someone will need this later. Same destination, different roads. We completed the traverse in the fastest time of any pair that rotation. Instructor Vareth noted it in her log. She also, I noticed from the feedback report, listed it under the category she had apparently created during my track. Non-standard survival variable, collaborative cognition across species with complementary information architectures. I was beginning to think she was going to write a paper. Day 25. This was the day I almost broke. Not in any dramatic way, not in the way that made a story, no cliff face, no chemical flood, no beacon moment. It was quieter than that. It was the accumulation finally reaching the place in me where the reserves were thinner than I'd accounted for. I was in the middle of the night traverse, a solo navigation exercise through the northern rift in darkness, a headlamp and a compass and no drone support, and I sat down on a flat rock to check my bearings, and I did not immediately get up. I sat there for what felt like a long time but was probably 4 minutes, and I was aware of everything I felt. The bone-deep exhaustion of 25 days at maximum output, the faint persistent shimmer in my peripheral vision from compound residue that hadn't fully cleared, the weight of how far I still had to go, and underneath all of it, a thought that had been waiting politely at the edge of my consciousness since approximately day 19. You could stop. Not from fear. That was the thing. I was not afraid in the way I'd been afraid on the cliff face, which was the useful, sharpening kind of afraid. This was the other kind, the flat kind, the kind that was trying to argue on very reasonable grounds that enough data had been collected and the point had been made and a rational organism would use the beacon now. I sat with that thought for 4 minutes. Then I thought about my grandmother at 19, on the shuttle to the orbital station, no map, no guide, no translated instructions. And I thought about her keeping notes anyway. And I thought about the person from her town who would come after her with the notes. I got up. I navigated the rest of the northern rift by compass and headlamp, and I came out on the north side at the correct egress point without using the beacon. And Instructor Vareth's surveillance drone had been circling overhead for the 4 minutes I sat on the rock, because the suit sensors had logged a stationary position and she had, I found out later, been 1 minute away from dispatching an emergency vehicle. She was there when I came out, again. Your sensors logged stationary, she said. I stopped to check my bearings, I said. She looked at me. Her amber gold eyes in the darkness, lit by the drone's lamp, were very direct. You stopped for 4 minutes and 13 seconds, she said. For bearing verification, this would require approximately 40 seconds. I said nothing. She said nothing. Then she said, I was going to send the vehicle. I know, I said. What stopped you? She said. And for a moment I wasn't sure if she meant what stopped me from stationary or what stopped her from sending the vehicle, and I wasn't sure she was sure either. 5 days left, I said. She was quiet. 5 days and a map worth leaving, I said. Instructor Vareth looked at me in the dark of the northern rift, with the canyon walls around us and the amber-light rivers far below, and I saw the thing in her face that I had learned by now, the recalibration, the ongoing revision. The model that had started with humans can't survive this and had been updating itself for 25 days and was not done updating yet. Come back to the facility, she said. You need nutrient supplementation, and 5 hours of sleep. Yes, I said. I will file the mandatory post-solo assessment. It will reflect that you completed the traverse and that the stationary period was within acceptable parameters. She had not needed to tell me that. She had simply decided to. Thank you, I said. She made a small gesture, not quite a nod, not quite something else but deliberate. And she walked beside me back to the facility, not ahead, and she matched my pace without comment. Day 30. Final rotation. The track ended where it began, a 10-kilometer traverse, but not the shale lowlands of the first day. This one was the full rift system, high and low, chemical flood and ridge crossing and cliff traversal, timed, solo, full hazard gear, emergency beacon carried but not intended for use. I ran it in just under 6 hours. I came out of the canyon system on the north end at the finish marker with the late amber light behind me and the facility complex ahead, and I did not fall down, though my legs wanted me to, and I did not stop, though my lungs were doing something complicated. The first person I saw was Darrow, the Vethian from the transport. He was standing at the edge of the landing platform in his Apex Group certification gear, which meant he'd finished his own track. He was watching me approach with an expression that, for a Vethian, was remarkably close to astonished. Rotation 30, he said. Rotation 30, I confirmed. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he did something I had not expected from a Vethian man who had told me on a transport ship 11 days ago that I would not survive the first rotation. He took my hand. The way I had offered mine on the transport, the gesture he had looked at and not taken. He held it for a moment, and he nodded once, and then he let go. I kept walking. Instructor Varath was in the review room, and she was not alone. The entire facility senior staff were there. 5 instructors, the facility commander, the 2 data officers, a GDC representative who had apparently been dispatched when the reports started coming in from Rotation 14. They were arranged around the debrief table the way people arrange themselves, when something has happened that they weren't prepared for, and are working very hard not to show it. Instructor Varath was standing at the head of the table. She was watching me walk in the way she had watched me the very first day, that still, measuring, amber-eyed attention. But there was something different in it now, not the unsettled quality of Day 9 or the conflict of Day 12, something quieter than either of those. Candidate Vasquez, the facility commander said. He was Vethian, senior, a wall of accumulated seniority and professional composure. You have completed all 30 rotations of the Karath-Roman 4 Deathworld Specialist track. Please confirm your physical status. Functional, I said. Fatigued. Compound exposure at accumulated levels within survivable parameters. I glanced at the suit log readout on the room's display. Per the data. Per the data, he repeated. He looked at Instructor Varath. She said nothing. He looked back at me. In 41 years of GDC Deathworld track operations, no human candidate has completed any Deathworld track above Class 2. Karath-Roman 4 is Class 4. He paused. This is a first. I'm aware, I said. The data collected during your track, compound exposure tolerances, physiological response timelines, survival decision-making under multi-factor stress, will be incorporated into the GDC human candidate baseline profile. He paused again. This information did not exist before you. I know, I said. That was the point. The GDC representative made a note on her display. The facility commander turned to Instructor Varath. Instructor Varath, your assessment of candidate Vasquez for the certification record. Instructor Varath was quiet for a moment. She had over 30 days said many precise and measured things, and I had learned to hear the weight in them, the things she meant past the surface of them. She looked at me now, and her amber gold eyes held that same complex, layered quality I'd seen in the barracks on day 12, that quality I'd learned to read as the face of someone who has updated their model and is honest enough to say so. Candidate Vasquez, she said, arrived on Kareth Roman 4 as the first human candidate for a Class 4 track. She operated in an environment with no pre-existing human physiological data, under compound exposure levels with no map tolerances, in geological conditions updated by a seismic event that had not yet reached the briefing materials. She paused. She read the seismic reports herself. A small sound in the room, not quite a laugh. She demonstrated decision-making under multi-factor stress at a level that, in my assessment, is the primary qualification metric of the Deathworld track. She demonstrated physical resilience that exceeds her species' registered profile in every category, which is not a consequence of physical superiority, but of preparation, information management, and the willingness to update her working model in real time under adverse conditions. Another pause. She also demonstrated something that I did not have a metric for at the start of her track. And that is, the facility commander said. Instructor Vareth looked at me. Purpose, she said. She came here with a specific and articulated purpose that was larger than personal certification. That purpose anchored her decision-making when physiological depletion would otherwise have compelled withdrawal. A beat. I have not previously assessed that as a survival variable. I will be revising my intake evaluation criteria. The room was quiet. The facility commander cleared his throat. For the certification record, Instructor Vareth's assessment is unconditional certification, she said. Master grade recommendation. I looked at her. Master grade was not the standard certification. It was the designation given to candidates whose track performance indicated aptitude not just for Deathworld survival, but for Deathworld instruction. It was, in 41 years of records, the rarest of the rare. Instructor Vareth, I said, I don't have the qualifications for master grade review. You don't have the prior certifications, she said. That's a different thing. The qualifications are demonstrated in track performance. The track is what I assess. A pause. I assess it as master grade. I didn't know what to say. The room was very quiet for a moment. I was aware of all of them looking at me. The facility commander, the data officers, the GDC representative, the other instructors, and Darrow in the doorway. And I was aware that none of them knew quite what expression to put on, because this was something outside the prepared framework. Master-grade candidates were identified early, usually. They came up through the system, through prior certifications at lower levels, through tracked performance over multiple tracks. They arrived at the master-grade review already shaped for it. The pathway had a shape, and it was not. One candidate, one track, alien planet, first human to finish a Class 4. Instructor Vareth, the facility commander said carefully, I want to be certain the record reflects your reasoning. The master grade designation requires. I am aware of what it requires, she said. I have submitted 17 master grade recommendations in 18 years. 14 were confirmed. She looked at the commander. I am confident in my assessment criteria. The commander was quiet for a moment. The review board will convene in 30 days, he said. Standard protocol. The candidate's performance record will be submitted in full. Yes, Instructor Vareth said. In the interim, standard Deathworld certification is confirmed effective today. He looked at me. Congratulations, Specialist Vasquez. You are the first human to hold Class 4 Deathworld certification. I had come here with a purpose, and the purpose was to map a road, and I had mapped it. I hadn't come for this. Instructor Vareth, as if she could see the thought on my face, said, The road you've mapped is more useful if the person who mapped it can teach others how to walk it. The GDC representative stopped making notes and looked up. The facility commander made a sound that in any other context would have been called moved. Darrow, who had apparently followed me into the review room because no one had told him not to, made no sound at all, but when I looked at him later, he had the expression of someone who has revised a significant prior belief and is too Vethian to say so directly. The night before I left Kareth Roman 4, Instructor Vareth came to find me on the landing platform, where I'd gone to watch the amber rivers catch the last of the light. She stood beside me without preamble, the way she did everything, directly, without ceremony. "I thought about your grandmother," she said. "Oh." The notes, the road she made for the next person. She was quiet for a moment. "My species has a record. The Kalahari keep histories, not individual ones, collective ones. The history of decisions made by whom, under what conditions, and what they cost and returned." She paused. "I have contributed to that record for 18 years as an instructor. I have never considered that the record itself is what makes the next candidate possible." She looked out at the amber rivers. "I considered the record as documentation of the past. Your grandmother considered it as instruction for the future." "Same thing," I said, "from different directions." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes, I think so." We stood in the amber light and the chemical wind, and the planet around us was as beautiful and lethal as it had always been, and I thought about 30 days of it. The shale breaking underfoot, the cliff face coming loose, the high rift haze, the long cold swim, the hours of decision-making in conditions my species was not supposed to survive. "I'm going to write up the data," I said. "Formal report, everything documented. Physiological response timelines, compound tolerances, the lot. I'll send it to the GDC Medical Division and to the track administration here." "I know," she said. "I'm going to require it of you, formally. As part of the master grade certification track." "You're already giving me assignments." "Yes," she said. I looked at her sideways. In the amber light, her lavender-gray skin had gone warm, the same way it did, I'd noticed, when she was neither measuring nor composing, when she was simply present in a place. "Is that how Kalahari instructors work?" I asked. "No warning, no preamble, just assignments." "It's how I work," she said. "Right, because you're not a philosophy, you're a tested method." She looked at me then, and what was on her face was not quite a smile. Kalahari faces don't arrange themselves into human smiles, but it was something in the family of smiles, something that reached her amber gold eyes. "Yes," she said. "Exactly." The transport came for me at 3rd hour the next morning, and Instructor Vareth was on the landing platform when it landed, which was not something instructors did. She handed me a data card. "The Kalahari Historical Record," she said. "The section on Kareth Roman 4, 160 years of decisions made on this planet, by whom, under what conditions, and what they cost and returned." She paused. "For your archive." I took it. It was small and flat and cold from the morning air. "Thank you," I said. "The access codes for your grandmother's archive," she said. "You mentioned them." I smiled. I pulled out my own card, a blank one, wrote down the codes from memory and handed it to her. She looked at it for a moment, then she put it in her chest pocket. The transport crew signaled ready. I picked up my kit. "Instructor Vareth," I said. She looked at me. "The next human candidate who applies for Kareth Roman 4, will you take them?" She was quiet for a moment. "If they read the seismic reports before arriving," she said, "yes." I laughed. A real one, full length, the way you laugh when something catches you completely off guard and turns out to be warm. She watched me laugh, and there was that almost smile again in her eyes. I boarded the transport. Darrow was already seated. He had not, it turned out, been on the landing platform by coincidence. He had been there specifically to see me off, which for a Vethian was a significant statement, and which he delivered with the complete absence of ceremony that characterized everything he did. As I settled into my seat, he passed me a data chip. "My personal after-action reports," he said. "All 28 rotations. The standard track is different from the rift track, but some of the zone analysis overlaps." He paused. "For your report." I took it. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," he said. "It's useful data. It was going to sit in an archive." He looked away, the way Vethians do when they're being generous and want you to have the decency to not notice. "The next human candidate," he said, "will have a better baseline if your report includes cross-species comparison data." "It will," I said. He nodded. "Subject closed." He opened his own data slate and began reading, and we flew in the particular comfortable silence of two people who have spent 30 days in the same hostile environment and now understand each other without needing to explain anything. I sat at the viewport and watched Karathroman 4 fall away beneath us. The amber rivers, the razor canyons, the bruised purple-gray of the surface that I had learned over 30 days was not just a wound but also a map. A landscape full of documented deaths and the decisions that preceded them. A record, kept by a planet, of every person who had ever tried to move through it. I thought about Instructor Varath standing on the walkway above the courtyard on that first day, looking down at me with that measuring amber gold attention. The decision she'd already made. Asterisk humans can't survive this asterisk, and the 30 days she'd spent revising it. I thought about Darrow on the transport, telling me I wouldn't last the first rotation, and Darrow on the landing platform taking my hand. I thought about Braca hauling himself out of shale holes with cheerful efficiency, and Sessa's weight at the end of my arm at the canyon rim, and the Talon candidate sitting on the chemical tributary bank making small involuntary sounds, and how all of us had, in our separate ways, made it further than anyone had predicted for us. Because Instructor Varath had shown us exactly what was going to kill us, and we had decided anyway. That was the thing about the Deathworld track. It wasn't about strength. It was about choosing to continue in full possession of all the information that would justify stopping. I added my name to that record, and on the data card in my pocket, I had 160 years of other names, other decisions, other costs, other returns. Kalhari soldiers and miners and scouts who had navigated the same canyons, climbed the same cliffs, crossed the same chemical rivers, made the same calculations. Their records kept honestly by a woman who believed that understanding a thing fully was the first requirement for surviving it. I was going to read every entry. My grandmother would have said, "That's how roads are made. One set of notes at a time." The transport broke through the cloud layer and Karathroman 4 became a dark shape below us, then a shape among other shapes, then the stars swallowed it whole, and I turned away from the viewport and opened my notes file and began to write. Day 1. First human candidate, Class 4 Deathworld track, Karathroman 4. The following is a complete record of compound exposure tolerances, physiological response timelines, and survival decision-making under multi-factor stress, for the use of every human candidate who comes after me. I hope this finds you well. I hope you read the seismic reports. End. Production notes Phase 2. Thumbnail brief asterisk. Composition asterisk medium 2-shot. Human woman Mara in foreground, partially turned, hair matted from chemical exposure, suit worn and patched. Instructor Varath in mid-ground, arms loosened from their usual fold, amber gold eyes on Mara, expression unguarded for the first time, awed, measuring, and something warmer underneath. Setting asterisk the high rift boundary marker, canyon walls in deep amber gray, chemical haze at mid-ground. Palette asterisk warm amber gold with deep gray undertones, atmospheric haze. Her register asterisk quiet complex awe, the defiant instructor whose model has been revised, not cold, not closed. Alien markers asterisk lavender gray skin, pointed ears, white braid, amber gold eyes, silver uniform with rank bars. Asterisk locked aesthetic line, asterisk photoreal cinematic film still, 8K sharp focus shallow depth of field. A beautiful humanoid alien woman as the hero of the frame lit softly on her face. A human man in the foreground seen from behind. Natural filmic lighting, 16. 9. Asterisk locked negative prompt asterisk, negative prompt. Cartoon, comic, anime, manga, chibi flat color, cell shading, 3D render plastic look, sketch, line art, painted illustration, ugly deformed face, asymmetric eyes, extra fingers, deformed hands, fused fingers, bad anatomy, blurry, low detail, JPEG artifacts, text, letters, watermark, logo, signature, two human men, crowd of humans.